The next paper, y'all, involves treadmills and bats. So here's a vampire bat. So this study. So I actually saw this on Twitter of all places, and I saw the author posted about their they had this new paper that came out, and then I saw this video on the treadmill. I forget who asked. Okay, it was Ella. Can you explain the thought process that creates bats on treadmills? I can tell you a smidge about that thought process. So the question here was, what is fueling these animals' ability to run? What kind of amino acids are they utilizing from the blood that they drink that allows them to run? Like, where is their energy coming from? So a lot of times, like in other animals like us, running comes from burning carbohydrates and lipids. And amino acids, like the protein, comes from a very, very, very tiny amount of what allows us to do running behavior. Do these? So actually, Optic, they didn't look at metabolism. It was published in the journal Biology Letters, which Optic is a very low tier specialized journal where they have like 2 figures that you can have in, and that's about it. So they did not look at energy expenditure rates and comparing the energy expenditure rates between other animals. It was more just, we know that for running, it was primarily focused on energy of running behavior. So they didn't even look at different kinds of flight behavior in these animals, but rather it was looking at movement and where the energy that they had for this movement came from. Hopefully that makes sense. So it's like very, very rudimentary. So Ella, they needed to make a machine or an apparatus that measured running behavior. And so what you can see here is it has a treadmill. So the treads are going to be going, and we'll see those in a moment. And then you see the striped line in the background. That's how actually they can measure speed and distance. So like the movement of that black line and the animal as well, like those movements are what's going to be driving how well they know the animal's speed. So and that's for other creatures as well. They have the same methodology for using zebrafish. So with zebrafish, they'll have the same like kind of striped lines, so you can do the calculation of speed independent of actually having to do it with other means. Like you don't have to put a tracker on them. This is like a cheap, reliable, and reproducible way that you can do the experiment. Hopefully that makes sense. But so again, their question was, because vampire bats eat primarily protein-rich diets full of amino acids, they suspected 2 possibilities. One is that the bats would be using the dietary amino acids to support the metabolism. The other part of the experiment was that they were reliant on either essential or non-essential amino acids, or it was relied on in different ways. Like they weren't sure what the reliability of that was. So they actually did a really, really cool methodology. They fed the vampires cow blood that either they labeled with a special isotope, the amino acid glycine, which, Glute of Gold, if you're out there, glycine is one of those amino acids that we talked about earlier this week. It's called a non-essential one. So if you remove glycine from the diet of the animal, or even us, we're fine. We can still function. But if you remove the amino acid from the diet of the animal of leucine, that's essential, and the animal would die. So they fed the vampires either the one that was labeled with the essential amino acid, or the not essential amino acid was labeled. And so then you can see and measure what is oxidized, like what is in terms of the labeled amino acids, is there an enrichment for one kind of amino acid or different kind of amino acid, right? Is it going to be the essential that's enriched, or is it going to be the non-essential, or is it the same? And what they ended up finding is that it's actually the same. So if in their diet these animals are getting amino acids, some of them are essential, some of them are not. It is just a really neat way that you can measure, okay, well, which one is important? Or are they equally important? And it turns out, at least in this instance, they're equally important. Does that make sense, y'all? The way that you measure it, right? So you give them a certain kind of blood meal, cow blood. You label in one of them the non-essential amino acid with a glowing molecule. In the other pot of cow blood, you label the essential amino acid with a glowing molecule. And then you just see how much glowing molecule pops out. Is it, only 40% of the off-put in the essential one is glowing when they get metabolized? Or maybe it's 30% or less, or vice versa with the non-essential? Like, what kind of amino acids are they using from their diet? And so that's the big question that they're trying to ask here. But y'all see like those black striped lines in the background, those again, like that's what you're able to kind of take the measurement on and around of like how this methodology is working. And there is, of course, like here, if we go to the actual paper, you know, this figure also gives you same idea though from this angle, right? As you're seeing them move, you can plot it along this black and white section of lines, and then you can figure out the walking gait. So they figured it was 10 meters per minute is the walking rate that they go, and then occasionally they do this jump, and so it's the aerial phase here is that you're able to see the jump. But yeah, so they're doing that comparison and just trying to figure out like what exactly is the pace and how quickly they go. And then here are the amino acids that are labeled. They also like these are all different individual bats that they test. So each of these is a different individual. They listed the capture date. They even gave us the GPS coordinates of where these animals were caught. Like that's a really, really nice bit of extra data that they gave us, like GPS coordinates. They give us how the animals were captured. So some are mist netting, other kinds are different flavor of traps. But yeah, so they give us the GPS coordinates, how they were caught, and then they give us the dietary supplements. If it was the glycine labeled, it was the leucine labeled, or if it was controlled. And then, yeah, here are some of, again, like respiratory exchange ratios. So like they're measuring metabolism insofar as like exhaling O2 to CO2. It's not your classic metabolomics where you're actually going in depth and figuring out metabolic rates, but it's at least something. And then here they're looking at like the treadmill speed and if there's anything with the glycine versus leucine, but it's going all down at the same rates. So they are getting via blood meal the necessary amino acids to do their behaviors. Again, like the big implication in terms of their life history is how does an animal that doesn't have any fat reserves, right? It doesn't have the fats, the lipids, the carbohydrates that we use. What does it use in order to like have these bursts of energy that its metabolomic needs? It uses proteins that it gets from the blood meals, but because that's where it's getting its energy from and it's not from stored reserves like what we have, they need to then feed more actively. More feeding needs to be done, otherwise they're much more likely to starve, versus that we can have some reserves, or if we're eating carbs, like it's a different kind of molecule that's going in. Exactly. Quick depletion. Guys, we're going to talk a little bit more about vampire bats just as we can. Some cool vampirisms. And remember, it has an enzyme. It has an enzyme that prevents it from the blood from clotting, and the enzyme is called Draculin. Yes, named after Count Dracula. Did you know that vampire bats run, and they will run after potential prey? And the question is, where does the energy that they have come from to allow them to run? So when we run, when mammals run, it's usually energy coming from carbohydrates or lipids, fats, right? We use those energy reserves. The bats don't have carbohydrates in their diet. They drink blood meal. You're not getting carbs from blood. You're also not getting a ton of lipids. So the question was, Cricket, where is the energy coming from? It must be coming from the protein that's in the blood meal. Let's actually look at them running, though, because I feel like that's why you're here tonight. So that's their running behavior. And this is actually a treadmill that the researchers built. And here was some of the photography that was in the paper as well. So the researchers, so y'all see those black and white lines. That's how you tell the pace that the animal is going at. As the treadmill is moving, the number of lines that are crossed and how they're crossed, that's how you can calculate the speed. So GK, it turns out they not only do this running behavior, but they also do an occasional jumping behavior. And so it's those two in combination that they utilize to catch like whatever prey that they're actually looking for. Why this is really interesting is because if they don't have energy storage, if they are just using whatever they have access to at the time, that means that if they don't eat, if they miss a meal and they have to expound this much energy, they're not going to survive. We just wrapped up a paper talking about the type of blood that vampire bats feed on and what they're getting out of it, and how that the amino acids and proteins that they get out of the blood is used for metabolism. And so because they don't have carbohydrates in their diet, they must get their energy reserves from elsewhere. It turns out it's from the blood meal protein, and that's why they have to constantly feed.